The records of the head historian, now usually known as the Shǐjì, is a monumental history of ancient China and the world finished around 94 BC by the Han Dynasty official Sima Qian after having been started by his father, Sima Tan, Grand Astrologer to the Imperial Court. The work covers the world as it was then known to the Chinese in a 2,500-year period from the age of the legendary Yellow Emperor to the reign of Emperor Wu of Han in the author's own time. The records has been called a foundational text in Chinese civilization. After Confucius and the First Emperor of Qin, Sima Qian was one of the creators of Imperial China, not least because by providing definitive biographies, he virtually created the two earlier figures. The records set the model for the 24 subsequent dynastic histories of China. Unlike Western historical works, the records do not treat history as a continuous, sweeping narrative but rather break it up into smaller, overlapping units dealing with famous leaders, individuals, and major topics of significance. History. Records of the head historian was begun by Sima Tan, the Grand Astrologer of the Han court during the late 2nd century BC, and was continued and completed by his son and successor Sima Qian, who is generally credited as the work's author. Sima Qian is known to have completed the records before his death in c. 86 BC, with one copy residing in the imperial capital of Chang'an and the other copy probably being stored in his home. Details regarding the record's early reception and circulation are not well known. A number of 1st century BC authors, such as the scholar Chu Shaosan, added interpolations to the records, and may have had to reconstruct portions of it. 10 of the original 130 chapters were lost in the Eastern Han period and seem to have been reconstructed later. Beginning in the Northern and Southern dynasties and the Tang dynasty, a number of scholars wrote and edited commentaries to the records. Most first millennium editions of the records include the commentaries of Pei Yin, Sima Qian, and Zhang Shǐjì. The primary modern edition of the records, with added punctuation and without commentaries, is the Zhonghua Book Company edition of 1959, which is based on an edition prepared by the Chinese historian Gu Zhigang in the early 1930s. Manuscripts. There are two known surviving fragments of records manuscripts from before the Tang dynasty, both of which are preserved in the Ishiyama-dera Temple in Otsu, Japan. Portions of at least 9 Tang dynasty manuscripts survive. 3 fragments discovered among the Dunhuang manuscripts in the early 20th century, and 6 manuscripts preserved in Japanese temples and museums, such as the Kozanji Temple in Kyoto and the Toyobunko Museum in Tokyo. A number of woodblock printed editions of the records survive, the earliest of which date to the Song dynasty. Contents. In all, the records is about 526,000 Chinese characters long, making it 4 times longer than Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War and longer than the Old Testament. Sima Qian conceived and composed his work in self-contained units, with a good deal of repetition between them. His manuscript was written on bamboo slips with about 24 to 36 characters each, and assembled into bundles of around 30 slips. Even after the manuscript was allowed to circulate or be copied, the work would have circulated as bundles of bamboo slips or small groups. Endymion Wilkinson calculates that there were probably between 466 and 700 bundles, whose total weight would have been 88 to 132 pounds, which would have been difficult to access and hard to transport. Later copies on silk would have been much lighter, but also expensive and rare. Until the work was transferred to paper many centuries later, circulation would have been difficult and piecemeal, which accounts for many of the errors and variations in the text. Sima Qian organized the chapters of records of the head historian into 5 categories, which each comprise a section of the book. Basic Annals. The Basic Annals make up the first 12 chapters of the records, and are largely similar to records from the ancient Chinese court chronicle tradition, such as the Spring and Autumn Annals. The first 5 cover either periods, such as the 5 emperors, or individual dynasties, such as the Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties. The last 7 cover individual rulers, starting with the First Emperor of Qin and progressing through the first emperors of the Han dynasty. In this section, Sima chose to also include de facto rulers of China, such as Xiang Yu and Empress Dowager Lu, while excluding rulers who never held any real power, such as Emperor Yi of Chu and Emperor Hui of Han. Tables. Chapters 13 to 22 are the tables, which 1 genealogical table and 9 other chronological tables. They show reigns, important events, and royal lineages in table form, which Sima Qian stated that he did because the chronologies are difficult to follow when different genealogical lines exist at the same time. Each table except the last one begins with an introduction to the period it covers. Treatises. The Treatises is the shortest of the 5 records sections, and contains 8 chapters on the historical evolution of ritual, music, pitch pipes, the calendar, astronomy, sacrifices, rivers and waterways, and financial administration. Hereditary houses. The Hereditary houses is the second largest of the 5 records sections, and comprises chapters 31 to 60. Within this section, the earlier chapters are very different in nature than the later chapters. Many of the earlier chapters are chronicle-like accounts of the leading states of the Zhou dynasty, such as the states of Qin and Lu, and 2 of the chapters go back as far as the Shang dynasty. The later chapters, which cover the Han dynasty, contain biographies, ranked biographies. The ranked biographies is the largest of the 5 records sections, covering chapters 61 to 130, and accounts for 42% of the entire work. The 69 biographies chapters mostly contain biographical profiles of about 130 outstanding ancient Chinese men, ranging from the moral paragon boy from the end of the Shang dynasty to some of Sima Qian's near contemporaries. About 40 of the chapters are dedicated to one particular man, but some are about 2 related figures, while others cover small groups of figures who shared certain roles, such as assassins, daring officials, or Confucian scholars. Unlike most modern biographies, the accounts in the biographies give profiles using anecdotes to depict morals and character, with unforgettably lively impressions of people of many different kinds and of the age in which they live. The biographies have been popular throughout Chinese history, and have provided a large number of set phrases still used in modern Chinese style. Unlike subsequent official historical texts that adopted Confucian doctrine, proclaimed the divine rights of the emperors, and degraded any failed claimant to the throne, Sima Qian's more liberal and objective prose has been renowned and followed by poets and novelists. Most volumes have at least one of vivid descriptions of events and persons. The author explains that he critically used stories passed on from antiquity as part of his sources, balancing reliability and accuracy of the records. For instance, the material on Jinkers attempt at assassinating the king of Qin was supposedly an eyewitness account passed on by the great-grandfather of a friend of Jin Kei's father, who served as a low-ranking bureaucrat at court of Qin and happened to be attending the diplomatic ceremony for Jin Kei. It has been observed that the diplomatic Sima Qian has a way of accentuating the positive in his treatment of rulers in the basic annals, but slipping negative information into other chapters, and so his work must be read as a whole to obtain full information. For example, the information that Liu Bang, in a desperate attempt to escape in a chase from Xiang Yu's men, pushed his own children off his carriage to lighten it, was not given in the emperor's biography, but in the biography of Xiang Yu. He is also careful to balance the negative with the positive. For example, in the biography of Empress Dowager Lu, which contains lurid accounts of her cruelty, he pointed out at the end that, whatever her personal life may have been, her rule brought peace and prosperity to the country. Source materials. Sima's family were hereditary historians to the Han Emperor. Sima Qian's father Sima Tan served as grand historian, and Sima Qian succeeded to his position. Thus he had access to the early Han dynasty archives, edicts, and records. Sima Qian was a methodical, skeptical historian who had access to ancient books, written on bamboo and wooden slips, from before the time of the Han dynasty. Many of the sources he used did not survive. He not only used archives and imperial records, but also interviewed people and traveled around China to verify information. In his first chapter, Annals of the Five Emperors, he writes, "I myself have traveled west as far as Keung-Tiung, north past Cholu, east to the sea, and in the south I have sailed the Yellow and Huai rivers." The elders and old men of these various lands frequently pointed out to me the places where the Yellow Emperor Zhao and Shun had lived, and in these places the manners and customs seemed quite different. In general, those of their accounts which do not differ from the ancient texts seem to be near to the truth. The grand historian used the Annals of the Five Emperors and the Classic of History as source materials to make genealogies from the time of the Yellow Emperor until that of the Gonghe Regency. Sima Qian often cites his sources. For example, in the first chapter, Annals of the Five Emperors, he writes, "I have read the Spring and Autumn Annals and the Guoyu." Quote, in his 13th chapter, Genealogical Table of the Three Ages, Sima Qian writes, "I have read all the genealogies of the kings that exist since the time of the Yellow Emperor." Quote, in his 14th chapter, Yearly Chronicle of the Feudal Lords, he writes, "I have read all the royal annals up until the time of King Li of Zhou." Quote, in his 15th chapter, Yearly Chronicle of the Six States, he writes, "I have read the annals of Qin, and they say that the Quan Rong defeated King Yu of Zhou." In the 19th chapter, he writes, "I have occasion to read over the records of involvement and come to the case of Wu Qian, the Marquis of Bian, ... of Changsha in Hunan for his loyalty to Gaozu." See article on Zhao Tuo. In his chapter on the patriotic minister and poet Qu Yuan, Sima Qian writes, "I have read Li Sao, Tian Wen Zhaoan, and Dai Ying." In the 62nd chapter, Biography of Guan and of Yan, he writes, "I have read Guan's Mu Min, Shangao, Chengma, Qingzhong, and Jiu Fu, as well as the Spring and Autumn Annals of Yanzi." Quote, in his 64th chapter, Biography of Sima Rangju, the grand historian writes, "I have read Sima's Art of War." Quote, in the 121st chapter, Biographies of Scholars, he writes, "I read the imperial decrees that encourage education officials." Sima Qian wrote of the problems with incomplete, fragmentary and contradictory sources. For example, he mentioned in the preface to chapter 15 that the chronicle records of the feudal states kept in the Zhou dynasty's archive were burnt by Qin Shi. Hu Wang because they contained criticisms and ridicule of the Qin dynasty, and that the Qin annals were brief and incomplete. In the 13th chapter he mentioned that the chronologies and genealogies of different ancient texts disagree and contradict each other throughout. In his 18th chapter, Sima Qian writes, "I have set down only what is certain, and in doubtful cases left a blank. Reliability and accuracy." Scholars have questioned the historicity of legendary kings of the ancient periods given by Sima Qian. Sima Qian began the Shǐjì with an account of the 5 rulers of supreme virtue, the 5 emperors who modern scholars, such as those from the doubting antiquity school, believe to be originally local deities of the peoples of ancient China. Sima Qian sifted out the elements of the supernatural and fantastic which seemed to contradict their existence as actual human monarchs, and was therefore criticized for turning myths and folklore into a sober history. However, according to Joseph Needham, who wrote in 1954 on Sima Qian accounts of the kings of the Shang dynasty, it was commonly maintained that Sima Qian could not have adequate historical materials for his account of what had happened more than 1,000 years earlier. One may judge of the astonishment of many, therefore, when it appeared that no less than 23 of the 30 rulers' names were to be clearly found on the indisputably genuine Anyang bones. It must be, therefore, that Sima Qian did have fairly reliable materials at his disposal, a fact which underlines once more the deep historical mindedness of the Chinese, and that the Shang dynasty is perfectly acceptable. While some aspects of Sima Qian's history of the Shang dynasty are supported by inscriptions on the oracle bones, there is, as yet, no clear corroborating evidence from archaeology on Sima Qian's history of the Xia dynasty. There are also discrepancies of fact such as dates between various portions of the work. This may be a result of Sima Qian's use of different source texts, transmission and supplementation by other writers. After the completion of the Shǐjì in California, 91 BC, the nearly completed manuscript was hidden in the residence of the daughter of Sima Qian, Sima Ying, to avoid destruction under Emperor Wu and his immediate successor Emperor Zhao. The Shǐjì was finally disseminated during the reign of Emperor Shan by Sima Qian's grandson Zhang Yun, after a hiatus of around 20 years. The changes in the manuscript of the Shǐjì during this hiatus have always been disputed among scholars. That the text was more or less complete by California, 91 BC is established in the letter to Renan, and Sima Qian himself gave the precise number of chapters for each section of his work in the postface to Shǐjì. After his death, few people had the opportunity to see the whole work. However, various additions were still made to it. The historian Lu Shǐjì reported the names of a total of 15 scholars supposed to have added material to the Shǐjì during the period after the death of Sima Qian. Only the additions by Chu Shaosun are clearly indicated by adding, Mr. Chu said, already in the 1st century AD, Ban Biao and Ban Gu claimed that 10 chapters in records of the head historian were lacking. A large number of chapters dealing with the 1st century of the Han dynasty correspond exactly to the relevant chapters from the Book of Han. It is unclear whether those chapters initially came from the Shǐjì or from the Hanxue. Researchers Yves Hervé and A.F.P. Hulsoway argued that the originals of those chapters of the Shǐjì were lost and they were later reconstructed using the corresponding chapters from the Hanxue editions. The earliest text and copy of records of the Grand Historian, handwritten, was made during the Southern and Northern dynasties period. The earliest printed edition, called Shǐjì, was published during the Northern Song dynasty. Hu Wang Shanfu's edition, printed under the Southern Song dynasty, is the earliest collection of the Sanjiazhu commentaries on records of the Grand Historian. In modern times, the Zhonghua Book Company in Beijing has published the book in both simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese editions. The 1959 Sanjiao edition contains commentaries interspersed among the main text and is considered to be an authoritative modern edition. The most well-known editions of the Shǐjì are notable translations. English: Watson, Burton, trans. Records of the Head Historian of China, New York, Columbia University Press. 2nd edition, 1993. Translates roughly 90 out of 130 chapters. Qin Dynasty, Volume 1, ISBN 978-0231081696. Qin Dynasty, Volume 3, ISBN 978-0231081689. Han Dynasty, Volume 1, ISBN 978-0231081658. Zhang Xianyan, Gladys Yang, Records of the Historians. Hong Kong, Commercial Press. Reprinted by University Press of the Pacific, 2002. Contains biographies of Confucius and Laozi. ISBN 978-0835106184. Raymond Stanley Dawson. Historical Records. New York, Oxford University Press. Reprinted, 2007. Translates only Qin-related material. ISBN 9780199574391. Nienhauser, William J. ed. The Grand Scribes Records, 9 vols. Bloomington, Indiana University Press. Ongoing and being translated out of order. The Basic Annals of Pre-Han China, ISBN 978-0253-340214. Vi. The Hereditary Houses of Pre-Han China, ISBN 978-0253-340252. Non-English Chavan, Edouard, trans. Les Memoirs historiques de Sima Qian, 6 vols. RPT. 7 vols. Paris, Adrian Maisonneuve. Left uncompleted at Chavannes' death. William Nienhauser calls it a landmark, and the standard by which all subsequent renditions must be measured. Chavan, Edouard, Maxime Kaltenmark, Jacques Pimpano, translators. Les Memoirs historiques de Sima Qian, 9 vols. Editions Yufeng, Paris. This is the completed full translation of the Shǐjì. Vyatkin, Rudolph V, trans. Historicheski Zapiski, 8 vols. Moscow. Norka Zhang, Zhongshan, Hao Zhida, eds. Quanzhou Quanzhou Guani Quanping Shǐjì, 6 vols. Tianjin Gujichu Banch. Mizusawa Toshitada, Yoshida, Kenko, trans. Shiki, 12 vols. Tokyo. Kyuko, Svein, Gunnaro, trans. Historiskopteng Yelsa, Carpet Learn 61-130, Biographia 1-70. Aarhus Universitätsverlag. Gregor Nusel, Alexander Siechig, trans. Aus den Aufzeichnungen and des Chronisten, 3 vols. Beijing, Verlag für Fremdsprachige Literatur, ISBN 978-7119-09676-6.